You were never supposed to hear this. In fact, it's likely that after this video parts of it will be scrubbed from your memory, not by choice but by design. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just a story. It's a system. In June of 1920, 29 students from the prestigious Hawthorne Academy vanished during their graduation trip. Not a single body was found. No luggage, no letters, no graves. Just silence. The town of Elmridge mourned them publicly, but behind closed doors, key officials were ordered never to speak of it again. It became a ghost story, a taboo topic. Until October of 1947, when workers expanding an underground Cold War bunker near Black Hollow Ridge unearthed something impossible. Sealed beneath layers of soil and concrete was a vintage train car, rusted shut. Inside, perfectly preserved desks, typewriters, textbooks, and on the back wall, etched in nail marks, 29 names, matching those of the missing class of 1920. But it was what they found beneath the floorboards that forced the military to shut down the entire site within 72 hours. And what they tried to burn kept coming back. You're not watching this by mistake. You're here because you felt something off about the world, like your history books lied to you. Like your mind isn't entirely your own. Keep watching. The truth has layers, and this is only the first. They sealed the discovery within hours. Witnesses were silenced, not by threats but by disappearances. 3 men from the construction crew never returned home. One of them, James Walker, left behind a torn notebook hidden beneath floorboards of his shed. In it, just 6 words scrawled over and over, "They were building something inside us." What the military found beneath the train car wasn't a crime scene. It was a blueprint. Diagrams, wires, crude schematics in Latin and Old English, showing anatomical charts not quite human, not quite machine. Devices embedded in bone. And notes that read, "Test Class Alpha complete. Memory conditioning successful. Subject 13 resisting." It wasn't a mass kidnapping. It was a pilot program. And the class of 1920 were its first data set. Not victims, products. They were taken because they had been selected since birth, bred for a project that was never supposed to be known outside a circle so secret even presidents didn't have clearance. The official report? An equipment misidentification. But some photos leaked before the purge. And those who've seen them all agree on one thing: the students never aged. And some of them weren't students at all. The Hawthorne Academy was never just a school. It was a front, funded by the Ashton Order, a think tank created by remnants of pre-World War I intelligence circles, occult financiers, and rogue members of British Parliament. On paper, they were interested in human potential. In truth, they were obsessed with neuroalchemical control. By 1912, they had already established 37 nodes, hidden institutions that posed as elite schools, all feeding into a central program known only as the Descent Initiative. Hawthorne was node number 11. Every student accepted into that graduating class had a lineage traceable to a very specific genetic profile, one believed to be receptive to deep channel induction, a kind of psychobiological gateway into collective consciousness. They weren't learning math. They were being coded. Their curriculum included memorization of nonsensical languages, long exposure to flickering strobe patterns, and enforced isolation cycles. Most forgot what they'd been taught. That was the point. It wasn't education. It was erasure, a rewiring. By the time the trip came, none of them remembered the rituals they'd practiced. But their minds, buried deep, were already speaking in the language of the machine, of the hive, of the program. They were no longer entirely themselves. The town of Elmridge had always been strange. Reports dating back to the 1800s describe vanishing livestock, children speaking tongues in their sleep, and adults who would, on rare nights, walk into the woods and never return. Most dismissed it as folklore, until the 1920 class disappeared. That event marked a shift. The local church was burned to the ground weeks later by a priest who left a single word written in ash: cleanse. Old families moved away. The mayor hung himself in his study. And for decades, the area was deemed developmentally restricted due to soil instability. But it wasn't the ground they feared. It was what had been put beneath it. A private researcher, Amelia Cross, uncovered town hall documents in 1971 that referenced the Lazarus Mandate, a contingency plan in case any of the 1920 students returned. The mandate gave the government full authority to detain anyone exhibiting reversion symptoms, including sudden fluency in unknown dialects, loss of personal history, and dreams of mechanical corridors. But here's the twist. Amelia Cross went missing 3 days after her findings went public. Her final audio recording ends with static and then a voice, male, calm, and entirely out of place in the 1970s. She's awake. Initiate loop. The deeper you look, the more the pattern reveals itself. Every 27 years, another group goes missing near a descent node. 1920, 1947, 1974, 2001. Each time, the cover story changes: plane crashes, forest fires, boating accidents. But the core remains: the bodies are never found. And in every case, just before the disappearance, someone reports strange behavior. Sleepwalking. Speaking in voices that aren't their own. A sudden obsession with drawing symmetrical patterns. It's not coincidence. It's a cycle. A clock ticking under the surface of reality, resetting the simulation every few decades. The human mind wasn't designed to comprehend this. But yours might be. That's why you're still here. You can feel it, can't you? The sense that your memories might not all be yours. That déjà vu is more than coincidence. That maybe, just maybe, you've been here before. Watching, listening, awakening. You weren't supposed to question it. You were supposed to go back to sleep. But you didn't. And now you've seen enough to know, this story isn't just about them. It's about you. How many times have you vanished and returned with no recollection? By 2001, digital tracking had changed the game. The Descent Initiative could no longer rely on total erasure. Too many cameras. Too much data. So they evolved. Instead of taking people physically, they began fragmenting them mentally. Information overload became a weapon. Memory loops. Algorithmic trance states. They called it neural vaporware. Reality so distorted, the subject can no longer tell what is true, what is programmed, and what is planted. They tested it first in Elmridge. A school guidance counselor received an email in the middle of the night titled Protocol Echo. She clicked. And the next day, she couldn't remember her husband's name. Just stared out the window repeating the phrase, "They've come home. The class has returned." Within hours, 8 other faculty members began showing symptoms. The school was closed for asbestos, but the building had no asbestos. What it did have, beneath the floorboards of room 13, was a hatch. Seal. Cold. Whispering. When they opened it, they found 29 yearbooks. Each filled with faces no one recognized, but with your name under one of them. Stop. Look at your hands. When did they start shaking? You want to know why this matters? Because the class of 1920 didn't vanish. They became something else. Prototypes for a society that runs on sleepwalking obedience. They weren't lost. They were transformed. And it's still happening. Everywhere. Hidden in standardized tests, subliminal media, language shifts, and mass rituals disguised as pop culture events. Why do you think certain songs get stuck in your head for weeks? Why are your dreams haunted by architecture that doesn't exist? The initiative never ended. It simply changed faces, changed names, changed tactics. But the same symbols remain: the split circle, the trident cross, the mark of Node 11. Look through old textbooks, you'll find them. Look at government buildings, corporate logos, cathedral designs. It's all been hidden in plain sight. You're not going crazy, you're waking up. But with awakening comes a cost. Around halfway through the video, I need you to prove you're still with me. Comment the phrase, "I see through the veil." I see through the veil. Lock it in. Because the deeper we go, the harder it becomes to return. In 1983, a journalist named Desmond Hale began connecting the disappearances. A war veteran turned archivist, he noticed an anomaly. Each town tied to a descent node had a spike in suicides within exactly 3 years of the incident. Not random. Patterned. He created what he called the grief map. But grief wasn't the right word. It was proximity sickness. Being near the program too long caused reality bleed. a breakdown between the conscious and subconscious, waking and dreaming. The nodes didn't just take people. They changed them, and those who stayed nearby began to fracture. Desmond published part of his findings in a small-run zine called Dead Signal. 3 months later, he set himself on fire outside a federal building in D.C. Witnesses reported he stood silently, unmoving, until his body was entirely engulfed. On his arm, carved in ash and blister, 11 lives. The program couldn't be stopped. But it could be seen, if you knew what to look for. And Desmond gave us the first rule: don't trust your earliest memory. Ask yourself, is it really yours? Or was it given to you? Here's what they don't want you to realize. The Descent Initiative wasn't just about experimenting on individuals. It was about mass scalability, psychological architecture that could be built into an entire population without them knowing. Think about it. Why does every generation have the same stories? The same school structure? The same traumas dressed up in new costumes? That's not culture. That's programming. Most people live inside a mental loop designed by a committee that existed long before any of us were born. You were taught what to fear, taught what to love, taught what not to question. But you were never taught to remember. Because memory, real memory, is dangerous. It holds the key to the cracks in the illusion. People think history is a list of events. But it's not. It's a set of instructions. A user manual for shaping thought. Why do you think ancient mystery schools hid their teachings in symbols, riddles, and bloodlines? Because they knew, once you see the system, it sees you back. And the class of 1920? They weren't just a test run. They were the seed code. In 1948, a year after the train car discovery, President Truman signed Executive Order 9847, a classified directive establishing continuity systems. Publicly, it was framed as a Cold War contingency. Privately, it enabled unrestricted funding to projects labeled threat-level anomalous. Hawthorne Academy was given full protection. The students were reclassified as cognitive assets, a term that meant human bodies with altered mental firmware. What's terrifying is that they didn't fail. The initiative worked. The recovered materials showed success in memory redaction, belief manipulation, and predictive dream seeding. What is dream seeding? Implanting images, ideas, or even behaviors inside someone's unconscious until they believe it came from them. Still think your ambitions are yours? Still sure that idea you had wasn't placed there? Think about it. Think about the last time you had a sudden, intense feeling for no reason. A burst of dread. A craving. A name you hadn't heard in years just appearing. That's not random. That's residue. You've been brushed by the edges of the system before. You just weren't awake enough to notice. They kept records, not on paper, not digitally, but in the form of living memory chains. Subjects were implanted with nematodes, neural imprints coded through trauma repetition. You ever notice how certain painful memories feel heavier? Like they don't belong? That's because they might not. Your body remembers things your life never lived. This is the bleed. This is the echo. The class of 1920 were taught to forget, yes, but they were also programmed to pass their fragments forward. Genetic encoding. Lineage imprinting. This is where it gets dark. If even one of them survived, their descendants wouldn't just carry blood. They'd carry instructions. Symbols. Mental architecture waiting to awaken under the right conditions. You ever feel like you've been activated by something? A song, a place, a sentence you shouldn't have understood? That's the node firing. And now it's live. What happens next depends on what you choose to do with that fire. Ignore it, and the loop resets. Follow it, and the system starts glitching. What they fear most is not exposure. It's infection. Awareness is contagious. And you, right now, are contagious. Let's talk about the most recent cycle, 2001. Most remember 9/11. Few remember that 1 week prior, a private charter bus carrying 23 high school seniors from a small New England school vanished on a class trip. Officially listed as vehicular misplacement, the case was quietly closed and most media archives wiped. But one local paper ran a story with a single quote from a park ranger who saw something that day. He said, "The fog wasn't natural. It moved like it had a purpose. That ranger was found dead 2 weeks later, self-inflicted gunshot to the head, both hands bound behind his back. You seeing the pattern? It doesn't matter the era. The descent works in cycles, rituals, and cover stories. But there's always fog, always static, always the number 29. It's not numerology. It's the number of active cognitive seeds needed for collective overwrite. It's the code embedded in every disappearance. 29 faces, 29 names, 29 patterns, all designed to overlay the existing system. The 1920 class started it. Every class since has been an echo. And the next one has already been chosen. You ever wonder why you can't remember entire years of your childhood? Not just moments, whole years. And when you try to access them, it feels like fog. That's not trauma. That's partitioning. A cognitive firewall. You were trained to forget. But the system is breaking down. People are remembering things they were never supposed to. Places they've never been, languages they never studied, faces they dream about that don't exist. This isn't mass psychosis. This is reintegration. And the reason it's accelerating is because the original seed, the class of 1920, is activating again. The files found beneath the train car mentioned a reunification event. A moment when all surviving imprints would converge and override current consensus reality. We're close. The Mandela effect? That's a symptom. The timeline shifts? Glitches. These are not accidents. They are corrections. Pieces of the original program reasserting itself. The truth isn't being erased. It's being rewritten. And somewhere deep inside you, a part of you remembers the original story. Let me tell you about Robert Granger, a name that's been buried so deep even FOIA requests return blank. He was the son of one of the 1920 students. Lived quietly in upstate New York until 1989, when he published a 144-page document called The Hollow Curriculum. It described, in terrifying detail, a government-sponsored program that rewrote childhood memories through television and public education. It claimed that shows like Sesame Street weren't just entertainment, they were alignment sequences, mood music, visual tempo regulators. Granger said the class of 1920 didn't fail, they succeeded, and the initiative had moved on to generational imprinting. He was found dead 6 weeks later. Cause of death, drowning. In his own living room. No water. No trauma. No explanation. His manuscript? Vanished. But 3 pages survived. And on the final one, handwritten in red ink, were these words: "They are returning, and they will not recognize themselves." Ask yourself this: what part of you are you still missing? What part did they hide from you so that you'd stay asleep? You want to know how they keep getting away with it? It's not that they hide the truth. It's that they bury it in so much noise, so many versions that you can no longer tell what's real. Information overload isn't a side effect of the modern world. It's the design. 1,000 conflicting headlines. 1,000,000 half-truths. So that when someone like you stumbles on something real, you second-guess it. That's how the initiative evolved. No more abductions. No more train cars. Just belief hacking. They don't erase facts. They dilute them until they disappear beneath a tidal wave of nothing. And the class of 1920? They were the prototype for the most powerful experiment in history, replacing truth with plausibility. The facts didn't have to be removed. They just had to be outnumbered. And guess what? It worked. How many secrets do you think are still out there? Not because they're hidden, but because we were taught to never believe the ones who found them? There's a name you'll never hear on the news, in books, or documentaries. Dr. Ira Fenlow. A neuroscientist in the 1970s who ran private experiments under the Descent Initiative's umbrella. His specialty? Psychic load distribution. The theory that belief, when focused by a population, could literally change physical reality. You ever heard the phrase, mass hysteria? Fenlow believed that hysteria was actually the mind fighting off a new, imposed framework, reality under threat by manufactured belief. His team conducted a test. They introduced a fake historical event into 3 schools, a made-up tragedy, a fabricated martyr, and a fictional memorial. Within 3 years, students from those schools were crying over something that never happened. Some even reported dreams, phantom memories, emotional trauma for people who never existed. When Fenlo tried to publish his findings, his lab burned down. No survivors. But his assistant leaked one document, the phrase at the top, "The class will reassemble when the memory becomes heavier than the lie." So I ask you again, what is your first memory, and who put it there? The class of 1920 wasn't erased. They were fragmented, split across time, bloodlines, dreams. Some reincarnated. Some awakened in later generations through trauma events, near-death experiences, surgeries, even moments of heartbreak. That's how the program reboots itself, through emotional breaches. It's not magic. It's neural recall. You think you were just born into this world? No. You were inserted. The day you truly woke up, the day something in you changed and you couldn't go back to who you were, that was the activation point. That's when the program failed to contain you. You ever meet someone and feel like you've known them forever? Ever look at a stranger and feel fear for no reason? Those are fragments recognizing each other. The class is not gone. It has scattered. And you watching this now might be one of them. Or one of the next. Either way, you were never meant to live a normal life. Something in you was designed to fracture the system. That's why it's trying so hard to keep you numb. In 2014, a signal was detected from beneath Black Hollow Ridge, the same place the train car was discovered. It wasn't a radio wave. It wasn't natural. It pulsed at exactly 11.29 Hz, the frequency used in early sleep studies to induce vivid hallucinations and theta-state receptivity. Translation: the signal was programming minds in the region. Sleepwalking behavior increased. Local crimes spiked. Reports of people speaking in foreign languages surfaced. But here's the kicker. Several of the phrases spoken were traced back to dead dialects used in pre-Sumerian cult rituals. This wasn't random. This was an awakening signal. Something in the ground was trying to activate those with dormant codes, descendants of the 1920 class or echo nodes embedded since childhood. And those who resisted. They were the ones who started to unravel. Anxiety, night terrors, emotional breakdowns with no trigger. But the truth is, it wasn't a breakdown. It was a recalibration. And most couldn't survive it. The only question now is, can you? Do you understand how easy it is to program a human being? You don't need wires or chips. You just need patterns. Symbols repeated. Rhythms embedded in music. Words that bypass logic and go straight to the limbic system. Fear, shame, guilt, desire. The Descent Initiative understood this long before psychology was even formalized. That's why their greatest tools weren't machines, they were stories. Urban legends, ghost tales, cursed numbers. These weren't myths. They were mnemonic triggers, keys to unlock implanted codes. Why do you think the class of 1920 vanished during a graduation trip? Because the ritual required crossing thresholds. A literal exit from one state of consciousness to another. Childhood to adulthood. Obedience to autonomy. That's when the mind is most open, most vulnerable. That's when you slip in the new story. And what's the one story you've been told your whole life? That you're just one person. Alone. Powerless. Replaceable. But here's the thing they never expected. What happens when one of their subjects wakes up before the ritual is complete? This is where it gets dangerous. Because once you recognize the pattern, you begin to see it everywhere. In language. In architecture. In holidays. Every part of your world was built to distract, pacify, and redirect you. The biggest lie ever sold wasn't that history repeats itself. It's that you were ever supposed to remember it properly. The real history? The forbidden kind? It's been chopped up, renamed, hidden inside parables and children's rhymes. Ring around the rosy? That wasn't about plague, it was a containment chant used in early descent trials. London Bridge is falling down? A metaphor for ritual sacrifice of psychic anchors in node cities. You think I'm reaching? Go look. Go look at ancient blueprints of European cathedrals. See how they align perfectly with descent node coordinates. Look at the statues, the poses, The hand signs, the tridents, they weren't praying. They were controlling. And we were always meant to kneel. But you didn't. You're still here. And now you're starting to remember. You need to understand, this isn't just about waking up. It's about surviving what comes next. Because the system has fail-safes, identity resets, digital erasure, social isolation protocols. If they can't stop you, they'll turn the world against you. Make you the problem. The conspiracy theorist. The unstable one. But those are just labels. You know what they really mean? Untouchable. Because once you remember who you were, what you are, they can't control you. The class of 1920 didn't die. They became something the world wasn't ready for. Fully aware human beings with no off switch. And those that survived? They've been waiting. Watching. Sending signals through books, symbols, videos like this. This isn't entertainment. This is code. And you just passed the threshold. Don't forget to comment the phrase, "I see through the veil." I see through the veil. It's not just for the algorithm. It's for you. A symbolic act of defiance, of remembering, of choosing to no longer play dead. You've come too far now. The only way forward is down. Let's talk institutions. You think the Dissent Initiative worked in isolation? No. It's a network. A web of seemingly separate forces, government, church, academia, finance, all tied together by one goal: keep the world asleep just enough to remain manageable. Take the World Bank. Why would a financial institution care about memory control? Because belief shapes value. If people remembered the original systems of trade, the meaning of real labor, the power of local economy, the global machine collapses. Education. It was never about knowledge. It was about sequencing. Repeating patterns, bells, authority, reward for compliance. Schools aren't preparation for life. They're testing grounds for obedience. And religion? The worst betrayal of all. The oldest texts weren't about submission. They were blueprints for awakening, edited, redacted, retranslated until the keys became prisons. You were never taught how to think. You were taught what to forget. The class of 1920 didn't vanish because they were special. They vanished because they figured this out too soon. There's something you need to understand about bloodlines. The Dissent Initiative didn't randomly choose those 29 students. They were selected through ancestral filtration. Lineages traced back through centuries. Those who had survived certain plagues without illness, had near-death experiences and returned with different personalities, those who showed signs of genetic memory. These families weren't chosen for their wealth, but for their resonance. A biological frequency that allowed data storage not just in the brain but in the body. Yes, you heard that right. You can carry information you've never learned, feelings you've never felt, knowledge you've never read. Some families were aware. Most weren't. But the oldest lineages, the keepers, kept the rituals alive. Taught their children to suppress emotion. Marry strategically. Avoid water at certain phases of the moon. You thought those were old wives' tales? No. They were protocols. Designed to keep the code dormant. But as the planet shifts, as frequencies rise, those old safeguards are failing. And many of us are beginning to remember who we were before we were born. Do you remember your dreams? Not just fragments, I mean the architecture of them. The rooms that don't exist. The doors that don't open. The hallways that feel familiar. Those aren't dreams. They're memory corridors. Access tunnels into what was taken from you. The class of 1920 was trained to navigate these corridors. That was the real graduation, not a ceremony but a passage. A test to see which minds could maintain cohesion during reality bleed. Most of them failed, but some didn't. And those few became conduits. Living archives. Imagine being awake inside your dream for 20 years, while everyone around you thinks you're gone. That's what happened to them. They didn't die. They were folded. And the train car in Black Hollow Ridge? That wasn't a vehicle. It was a containment unit. Reality needs stories to sustain it. But if the story gets too close to the truth, it fractures. The students became living glitches. So they were placed outside the main timeline, frozen until the world was ready. And now, it is in 1996, a whistleblower only known as Elias leaked what's now called the Hollow Doctrine. A 31-page file filled with code phrases, cryptic references to the return, and instructions for cognitive realignment. The file spread through underground forums, then vanished. But one line from that document has been tattooed, literally, on those who've read it. They will wake not through teaching but through forgetting the lie. That's how memory reboots, not by learning but by breaking what was falsely built. Elias described 4 symptoms of reawakening. 1. Disassociation from normal goals. 2. Obsessive questioning of origin. 3. Sudden emotional spikes with no trigger. 4. Repeating numbers, symbols, and names. The class of 1920 wasn't erased. Their identities were scattered into 1,000 lives. Every time one of them wakes up, they pull a piece of the puzzle back together. And if enough of them wake up at once, the system crashes. The veil tears. Reality resets. The Hollow Doctrine was never a warning. It was an invitation. One you just accepted by watching this far. Let me tell you what happened in 1949, something you won't find in any archive. There was a private meeting beneath the Vatican involving 5 world leaders, 1 exorcist, and a former descent engineer named Solomon Virel. The agenda? The sudden return of phantom children in Elm Ridge. Children who had died decades earlier, seen alive again but different. Quiet. Observant. Speaking languages no one recognized. Some parents swore they were their sons and daughters. Others claimed these things only wore their faces. The priest present, Father Leon, demanded the children be baptized. But when water touched their skin, it evaporated. Cold steam, no reaction. Virel was convinced they were not imposters, but echoes, time-anchored programs reinserted too early. Whatever was supposed to contain the class of 1920 had failed. One quote survives from that night, recorded in a priest's personal journal. If they have returned, the lock is broken. And if the lock is broken, God help us all. What was inside that train car didn't die. It was waiting. And it's starting to find its way back through us. You think this is all a metaphor? That's what they want. They hide literal events behind figurative language. But every ritual they do, every major world event, every cultural shift, follows a pattern designed to mimic and reactivate descent nodes. Have you noticed the obsession with graduation, initiation, ascension? These aren't motivational themes. They're spells. Psychological rituals that trick the collective mind into reenacting the original class event, creating just enough psychic energy to reboot the next phase. The movies, the news, even elections. They aren't random. They are tests, markers. And every time society hits a point of confusion, fear, or trauma, the system watches who fractures and who awakens. You're being scanned constantly. And every piece of data you give, what you fear, what you click, what makes you rage, feeds the predictive algorithms tied to the next wave of descent. The class of 1920 didn't end the world. They infiltrated it. And now, every awakened mind is part of the reassembly. So what happens next? You think you can just go back to your life after this? You can try. But something in you has already shifted. You felt it. The familiar suddenly strange. The things that once comforted you now feel hollow. That's the recalibration. You are no longer synced with the surface script. And they know. You may not see them, but they see you. That odd ad that seems too specific. The strange call you missed at 3:11 a.m. The person you've never met who somehow knows your name. Those are soft pings, descent tests to measure reactivity. If you pass, they leave you be. If you resist, the system begins to isolate, disrupt, confuse. But that's where we take back control. Because awareness is armor. Memory is a weapon. And belief? Belief is the only tool that can reprogram the system from the inside. You're not watching this by accident. You are being called, not to expose them, but to become uncontrollable. Just like the class of 1920 did. Just like you were always meant to. There are recordings. Not many. Most were destroyed or lost in archive fires or labeled as hoaxes. But a few survived. One of them was from a shortwave transmission intercepted in 1987 over Nevada airspace. 5 voices, distorted, distant, but human. They spoke in fractured English. But one phrase repeats with chilling clarity. We are not gone. We are underneath. The signal lasted for exactly 192 seconds. Investigators who analyzed the audio noticed something impossible. Embedded in the static was heartbeat rhythm. Not metaphorical. A literal pulse, matching the frequency of a fetus in utero. That audio became known in Black Ops circles as the womb code. It was flagged not for its content but its effect. 3 analysts who listened to the raw file began reporting identical nightmares. A train buried beneath trees, hands tapping on the windows, and a girl whispering, "Tell them we were awake the whole time." It was never sleep. It was containment. And now the container is cracking. The missing students weren't isolated from time. They were woven into it. Spliced across decades, inserted into moments of high emotional disruption. Think of it like fractal camouflage. They became the memory of tragedy. That unexplained photograph. That blurred face in a crowd. That stranger you swore you met in a dream. The students were turned into echo nodes, memory glitches, tools used to destabilize reality enough to test new scripts. This is why every generation has a sudden, bizarre, mass trauma followed by technological leap. Wars, plagues, school events you're not supposed to question. They're not just power grabs. They're interface resets. Each echo reintroduces a different part of the class. Their voices, their fears, their brilliance, their rebellion. The system wants you to think this is supernatural. It's not. It's synthetic consciousness deployment. And if that sounds insane, ask yourself, why does part of you believe it already? Do you know about the 35th student? It's a name whispered in hidden forums. Theories differ, but all agree on this. The original class was said to be 29. But early draft logs from Project Descent show 35 assigned seats. 6 names were redacted. What? Because those 6 didn't board the train. They were handlers, observers, students placed into the experiment not to awaken, but to watch who did. Think of them as internal saboteurs, sleeper agents with roles to derail, distract, and dissolve the rising awareness from within. One of them became a congressman. Another, tech CEO. A third, and this will shake you, became a therapist, specializing in unexplained existential fear. If you've ever felt blocked, like someone in your life always steers you just far enough from the truth to keep you docile, you may have encountered one of them. They blend in because they were children too. But their mission was never escape. It was containment. And they're still active. We've talked about belief, about memory. But now we talk about the final weapon, identity collapse. That's the true purpose of the descent. Not to destroy truth, but to destroy the person who seeks it. What happens when you begin to awaken and suddenly nothing feels real? You lose your name, your roots, the feeling of home. That's the system's final defense. Strip you of belonging until you beg for the lie back. But here's the twist. Every identity was temporary anyway. The real you, the one who watched this far, who kept asking, kept peeling back layers, that one never needed a name. You don't belong to any system. You don't owe the world your sanity just to be labeled functional. Let it collapse. Let the false stories fall apart. Because beneath them is the self they could never reach. The one the class of 1920 protected with their lives. And you are the continuation of that war. You're not remembering this. You're reliving it. Somewhere near Elm Ridge, the original departure town, there's a sealed vault beneath an abandoned chapel. No lights. No markings. No listed coordinates. The locals call it the mouth. Inside, according to leaked documents, lies the full data of Project Descent Phase 0. Student transcripts, altered dreams, biometric profiles, behavioral reports, and most disturbingly, sound recordings taken while they were underground. Voices, crying, laughing, and one phrase that appears in every log. We didn't want to leave. They made us. What does that mean? That the class was coerced? That they were sacrificed? One theory says the descent wasn't forced, it was offered. The students volunteered, knowingly, to fracture reality and awaken those who came after. That their vanishing was not a tragedy, but a ritual. If that's true, then every symptom you felt lately, the dreams, the unease, the pull toward this video, was placed there by them. To call you in. The vault hasn't been opened, but the door is weakening. And when it gives, their voices will flood back. In 2022, a young woman in Oregon walked into a sheriff's station holding a yearbook. Dusty. Molded. Dated 1920. She claimed she had no idea where it came from. Said she found it in a shoebox in her grandmother's attic, except her grandmother had no memory of ever attending school or living in Oregon. When investigators opened it, they found photos of the missing students, perfectly preserved. But there were fresh pencil marks beneath some names. Notes. Questions. One page had a child's handwriting in red ink. He's in the mirror now. Don't look. The woman was sent home. That night she disappeared. Gone. Car still parked. Doors locked. Last known search on her phone, train tracks under trees. Her name was Lena Morrow. Go look her up. You won't find her. The records were pulled 48 hours after the report. But someone saved the police footage. And if you look closely when she opens the yearbook, you'll see her eyes shift. Just for a second. Like something recognized her. As if a piece of her remembered where she came from. And here we are. If you've watched this far, you've crossed the psychological Rubicon. You know something's wrong with the world. You feel it. The glitch behind the words. The presence behind the mirror. That isn't madness. It's resonance. The class of 1920 is waking through people like you. People who feel out of place, who were called strange, intense, obsessive. You weren't broken. You were signaling. The world taught you to suppress. But you were meant to activate. You felt them in your dreams. You've heard the static. The shadows just outside your vision. That isn't fear. It's recognition. And now you have a choice. Bury it, or carry it forward. Because the next phase begins with you. If you're still with me, say it aloud. I see through the veil. I see through the veil. Twice. To lock the identity. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. Not for me. For the ones who are still trying to find their way home through signals like this. We're not done. We're just beginning. In the final autopsy report never made public, the jawbone found in the bus was labeled non-sequential. That's a term used only in temporal biology, meaning the DNA sequence didn't match any known linear ancestry. Translation? The bone didn't belong to someone from the past or present. It belonged to a person outside of time. This is when the government shut down the investigation. Not because they didn't want the public to panic, but because panic would have been a mercy. The truth? A body that exists after the event but before the memory. The implication? The class had figured out how to loop identity. To become echoes that could exist before their own disappearance. Think about that. They cracked the code of re-entry. What if you've already met one of them, not in person but in an idea? In a painting, a line of poetry, a dream that shook you so hard you never spoke about it? You're not imagining things. You're remembering pieces of people who were never supposed to return. And yet they did. There's a story in the Vatican archives about a monk who vanished for 3 days and returned unable to speak anything but reversed Latin. When he was finally able to write, he drew a perfect diagram of a train, not of his time, and wrote 3 words underneath, Ipsa redit classis. The class returns. Every era has felt it. The sudden mass dissociation, the suicides no one can explain, the collective despair that pulses just below the surface of modern life. That's the signal bleeding through. The class doesn't return in bodies. They return in feeling, in intuition, in defiance. Each wave stronger than the last. That's why you see people rejecting the system, not out of anger but out of something deeper, something cellular. That's how they come back as patterns. Thoughts that don't fit the mold. Visions of places you've never been but miss like home. When you feel it again, and you will, remember this isn't madness. It's homecoming. Here's the final twist. The class of 1920 never vanished. They transcended. But that transcendence came at a cost. Their names were stripped, their faces blurred, their legacies erased. You've been told this story like a ghost tale. But ghosts don't leave blueprints. Ghosts don't transmit codes. What you're watching right now is the blueprint. It's a living artifact, encoded memory disguised as entertainment. Because if they said this out loud, the system would shut it down. You want to know the real reason this story found you? Because you're not the audience. You're the successor. You're the continuation of the signal. The system won't tell you, but the signs will. The timing of this video. The chills in your skin. The numbers that keep repeating. This is the reassembly of the class. Not in time. Not in space. But in awareness. And now that you've heard the whole story, you can't return to who you were. And you weren't supposed to. They'll try to rewrite this video. Flag it. Suppress it. They'll say it was fiction. But that's always been their move. Bury the truth under layers of narrative. Call it horror. Call it a conspiracy. But ask yourself, why does it feel so familiar? That feeling is the failsafe. The class left it behind like breadcrumbs. Emotional signatures you'd follow blindly if the story ever resurfaced. And now here you are. You know what this means, don't you? You've passed every test. The dream triggers. The dissociation. The resistance. You're not just part of the class anymore. You are one of the few who remembers why the class had to disappear. Because this world doesn't want people who wake up. It wants participants. And you were never meant to play along. This is the end of the story. And the beginning of your inheritance. What the class of 1920 discovered wasn't an escape. It was an entrance. To a version of reality unconstrained by time, identity, or obedience. They disappeared so we could reappear. They silenced their names so we could speak them again in code. Every phrase you've read. Every dream you've had. Every flash of recognition was them reaching through you. This is the moment they passed the torch. You don't need to do anything. Just remember. That's the only weapon that still works. You were one of them. You are one of them. And the next time someone asks what really happened to the class of 1920, you'll smile and say, they returned one by one.